I made one render every single day for 8 years without missing a day. That's 2,922 renders. And here's what I learned. In this video, I want to share everything I learned along the way. If you're struggling to improve or you just want to know what it takes to commit for something for this long, this video is just for you. So without any further ado, let's get a little bit into the story of this project. So before the video starts, I just want to say that this video will be built up in a way where it's pretty much all audio. You know, you can do your laundry, cook, whatever, just listen to it like a podcast. I will also show a few images during this video, but it will be mainly audio. So let's get into it. So let's go actually a little bit further back even. Let's go back to 2015, 2016. So for those of you who have been on this channel for a long time, you know that I used to make music. I mean, I still do, but back then I tried to make it seriously. Was I good at it? No, not really, but it was fun. And at the time, I was making my first album, or my first EP rather, and I needed a YouTube visualizer. And I was thinking, well, how do I do this? Back then I didn't have After Effects or anything like that, so I couldn't really make it myself. So I was just Googling around for like free visual content. And look who popped up rather quickly. Mike Winkelmann, aka Beeple. And I think most of you who watch this video right now know who Mike Winkelmann is. In case you don't, he became pretty much world famous back in 2021 when he sold his art piece, The First 5,000 Days, for almost $70 million, making him the third most valuable living artist today. But back then, Beeple made these really cool audio visualizers, which, you know, made him also quite famous because pretty much every DJ used them, especially in the up-and-coming artists, because they were free. So I used those, I put them into my videos, and went on from there. After about a month or so, I was thinking, well, how do you make these visualizers? And what I found was Blender, because it was free. So that was the first thing that came up. So I downloaded Blender, tried to make a few things, made these really cool little low poly renders that I think a lot of us used to do back in the day. And I started just experimenting with rendering and stuff, but I noticed that I couldn't really make a big progress because I didn't know how to watch tutorials or how to find tutorials for what I want to do, because I wanted to do what Beeple does. That was the main thing that I wanted to do. And that is where we'll talk very quickly about one specific render, Beeple's Box 3W. This render is the render where when I saw it, I was, okay, this is what I want to do. I'm sold. Let's do this. Let's buy full into this. And this is a render that he made somewhere in 2015. And actually, shout out to Beeple himself, who was kind enough to send me a large print of this render to hang up in my office, because as you can see in the image right now, I have 3 large prints in my office, which are my 2 biggest inspirations, which is on the right side, it's Beeple, on the left side, it's Simon Stalenhag, and in the middle, it's one of my renders. And so this is like a little history wall. So Blender also never really clicked with me. So I just thought 3D is like that. It just never clicks, you know? And so I used Blender for about half a year, maybe a year. I'm not quite sure, half a year to a year. And it was just frustrating. It was fun at the beginning, and you know, but it was just like I could never really get an image out that I was really happy with, which at the time I thought was not normal. But if you're a beginner just starting out, you really have to get used to being bad. You have to be bad before you can be good. And that is something that is very frustrating, but you have to get used to it, and you have to embrace the small little steps that you make in the beginning. But after about a year of using Blender, I was like, well, I'm not getting anywhere near Beeple yet. What does he do differently? So I noticed that he was uploading all his project files of these visual loops for free. You could just download the Cinema 4D files. And I was like, well, let's just download it and open it in Blender. Of course that didn't work. So what did I do back then when I saw, okay, I need Cinema 4D? Well, I did what a lot of us probably did. I cracked Cinema 4D immediately. So I opened Beeple's project and looked into them, and I was stunned. I was like, oh my god, this is so cool. And a lot of it made sense to me. That's the weird thing. Not that I knew how it worked, but the way that software was built up and the way that his project files worked, it was quite easy to understand how this project works, and I was able to replicate a lot of it very quickly. However, after about 2 to 3 weeks of doing this, I noticed that I didn't really learn a lot of it, because I spent like 2 full nights in Cinema 4D and then like a week of not doing anything and then another day of like doing another idea. I felt like that whole passion that I had in the beginning got like watered down by time, and I really hated that. So again, I went back to Beeple's website and looked, you know, for inspiration when I saw, hold on a minute, he does this every single day. And so I read a little bit into this, and you know, read about all the theoretical parts about this. You know, doing something every single day makes you be good eventually. So I thought, you know what, I've been doing one render for 2 days now, so like one day and another day, and this was the third day. Yeah, let's do something today. The next day I thought, let's do it again, and in no time I was doing it for a week. And after that week I was like, hey, that wasn't too bad, let's do it for a month. So I did it for a month, and that wasn't too bad either. So I said, you know, let's do it for another month. And that was where shit hit the fan. Because that's where I really started to get frustrated with, like, I'm not getting better, I don't get it, I don't have any more ideas, and, you know, that's where it started to become work. But it is work. It's not always fun. Like, you know, even nowadays, when people ask me, how do you still find the motivation? I'm like, I have to force myself to do it sometimes. It's not fun every single day, but you know, it works. It really works. So I pushed and pushed for another month. And after about 3 months of doing that, I felt like, well, I'm happy. I'm kind of happy with what I could achieve. I was happy that I started to understand the software. However, my renders didn't look like the ones people did. And I didn't understand why. I was like, I do everything exactly like he does in his rendering files. Why does my render not look like this? And at the time, I was not posting on Instagram yet, by the way. I was only posting on Facebook and then sharing it into 3D groups on there. And so one day I was asking, you know, how does that work? And at that time, VFX Freak hit me up. Well, he's now known as VFX Freak, but Angel hit me up, and he told me, well, you know, Beeple doesn't use the physical render. I was like, what do you mean? I just hit render. I didn't understand what rendering in that sense was, sort of. So it was like, no, he uses Octane render. And for a fact, I just switched to Cinema 4D, and I wanted to get into Octane render. So let's do it together. I was like, heck yeah. So we bought ourselves an Octane license and started, you know, trying it out. And literally from day one, that was the difference maker. Not because Octane is so much better than physical render, but it is my rendering engine. You know, it was exactly in unison with my brain. So I immediately understood what I was doing. It was super easy to do everything, and rendering was fun again. And I had so many new ideas to test out. Like I had like years worth of ideas to do. So then Octane came along, and also at the same time around, I started posting on Instagram. And also here Angel was a little bit of a mentor to me, because he pretty much taught me how to Instagram, you know, how hashtags work and stuff, and it started working out really well. Then from there on I said, okay, I don't have my own style yet. How do I get that? And really quickly I realized it's not something that you actively get. It's something that you have to develop. So what I did for, I think at least like 3 years of everydays, I just copied a lot of different people. Like just copied Beeple, copied Stuzor, copied French Monkey, all of these names back then. I just copied them as much as I could to learn how to do specific things. And here's the thing, copying somebody is not bad, at least not in the beginning, at least when you're learning. Once you know how to do stuff, when you still copy somebody just because their style is famous, that's not a great thing. But learning from copying a style by having a actual reference of something that you want to do, that works wonders, because you can actually, you know, break down the image yourself. And it's just, I really advise you to copy people in the beginning, just in the beginning though. And of course I also went around on Google and stuff and like copied certain photographs and tried to replicate it, and this was where my first signature style sort of appeared, which back then was fog. If you didn't know, in the 3D community back then I was known as the fog god, TheDizzyViper the fog god, which was pretty funny because there were a lot of people, also big names, who didn't really know a lot about a fog that back then, because it was really slow to render, so not many people used it. So yeah, that's how I got that Fog God title. Nowadays I think the Fog God title is not in my hands anymore, but it's in my friend Hugh Leap's hands. He is, I think, insane with fog nowadays. And because of the success with these fog renders, I also started to make tutorials about this, like about general 3D stuff that I did do. And what I noticed when I made my first tutorial was I never really watched a tutorial about anything, because it's hard to explain, because whenever I learn a software, I just watch very specific tutorials. I watch, how do I do this effect, specific effect, that's the tutorials that I watch. I never watched a tutorial, Cinema 4D basics, 1 to 50. I never watched that, because I'm somebody that likes to learn with trial and error. It takes a lot more time, but it stays burned into your brain for a lot longer. However, learning yourself only gets you so far, so you have to watch a few tutorials about specific things. That is also why my tutorials are about very specific things, because I personally don't really watch those basic tutorials, and especially those basic tutorials are all over the internet. No matter what software you're using, you will always find a basics tutorial playlist somewhere on the internet, at least, and for free, of course. However, my tutorials that I started doing then were exactly the same type that I used to watch. So I make tutorials about very, very specific things and very specific discoveries that I made, or developments that I made during this time. Which is why you'll find tutorials, for example, of how to make skyscraper windows, which is a very specific thing. You know, it's not like how to model a skyscraper. It's like how to make the window shader for the skyscraper. That was in year like 4, I think, where I started to do tutorials. Here comes the most important chapters of my journey, I think. This is like, we're now in year 5 to 6, roughly, which is 2021, 2022, somewhere around that. This is where I really started to get my own style out. This was where I started to make more car renders. This is where I started to make these really sick sci-fi renders. And here also comes a very big turning point. This is like very, very interesting time, because at this point I just stopped experimenting with anything, like in the sense of experimenting with styles, and started gravitating towards a very specific branch, very specific thing, which back then were cars, sci-fi, cyberpunk, and overall just, you know, realism. Once I started doing that, that really started to change my style a lot, especially also my skill and the quality of my work. Because now I wasn't a jack of all trades anymore, I was more a king of one specific thing. Or maybe 2 or 3 specific things. Although I don't like to use that term king, because I think there are a whole lot of people who are like a million times better than I am. But with those specific genres of renders, I was at a very good point where I was very happy with what I did, where I was convinced that my work is good. And that, like I said, it was a total game changer, because then my Instagram started to blow up, especially also, of course, with the barn finds. Well, what year was that? It was probably chapter 6. Like year 60, because I have a folder on my PC that's called like by chapters. So I think it was chapter 6 or 5 where the barn finds happened. But you know, that year 5 or 6, we're already in a very present time. So I think a lot of you guys already know from there on, because like I think most of my followers come from that time. But the interesting thing is also that at this time my motivation was already really much up, and I still have motivation, and it doesn't feel like I am losing it any time. The only time where I really lost motivation was one time, like a couple of weeks before I switched to Octane render. That was like where I was like, this is not for me. Then before I switched to Cinema 4D, and also a couple of years later, where I just wasn't happy with my style. So there were 3 major points in time that almost made me quit, and it was always because of the same reason. It was because I didn't feel like I made any progress anymore. And the progress thing is what I really enjoy about this. So if you do everydays, or if you just want to start doing everydays, do it, and don't expect always to make the same progress every single day. You might make insane progress for the first month and then no progress for the next month. But the funny thing is, it will only feel like no progress to you. But for an outstander, it looks a lot like progress, because like you just get used to the progress that you're doing, and that's why that whole progress curves feels a lot less exponential than it actually is. And you know, now we're in year 7 and 8, which is pretty much the present. Not a lot has changed since then. It's been, you know, just developing new styles, or like not even developing new styles, it's more like refining the old styles and doing new stuff with it. Because if you look back to like year 4, for example, I've already done a car crash back then. But if you compare the car crashes that I did back then to the car crashes that I do now, it's a world's difference. The ones now are much more convincing, of course. Even though back then I was very happy with the render back then, which is fine, you know. Back then I was happy with the render. Now I think it's not bad either, but the ones that I do now are a completely different thing. So this was a very, very long part about the story of my work, about my story and what I did in those 2,922 days. So now that we're reached almost the end of the video, what did I learn in those 8 years exactly? While I could tell you everything skill-wise and technical I learned, I think it's more about what I learned about mentality and how to push through something like this, you know? Doing it 2,922 days, it's quite a challenge when you're starting it. There are a few points that I learned along the journey, and number 1 is learn to be bad, or accept to be bad in the beginning, because you're gonna be, and don't let other people's work get you down. Don't think just because you see, you know, Ash Torp or somebody, or like Cornelius Demmerich making cool renders, don't let that insecure you, you know. Just think for yourself that, you know, everybody has been doing this for years, if not decades. It's not gonna be different for you either. Maybe you're a talent and you'll manage to do it within a year. There are many people who have managed to become insanely good within like a year or two. But don't be discouraged just because, you know, your first 100 renders don't look insanely good, or don't look as good as you want them to be. Number 2 is push through the plateaus of learning. Don't let those discourage you either. Like, don't let this stop of the learning curve discourage you. It will come back eventually. There will be some time where you feel like you're not progressing, you're not becoming better. But it's also part of the process. There's always like, you know, steps, and you'll get better over time. And yeah, just don't be discouraged by those plateaus of the learning curve. Next one is find a niche and go deep. This is something that I can't advise to everybody in doing this, because, you know, there are people who want to be 3D generalists. However, being able to do everything and then one specific thing being extremely good, like top of the line, that will get you far. You know, learn everything that you like, but if there's one point where you feel like, oh, this could be it, really buy into this full. Like, try to master this and be the best at that one thing. That doesn't mean that you have to suck at all the other things. Don't try to evenly spread your skills across all the branches in the 3D space. Or, I mean, you know, this whole video is not only for 3D artists, it can also be for any other type of work. But don't try to spread your entire skill onto all the branches of your genre of work that you do. Get good at the basics and then buy into one or two things where you could become the best in the world, essentially. Then burnouts or art blocks, try avoiding those by taking breaks, which doesn't mean leave out a day. But, you know, when you see, okay, I have an art block, maybe try to come back a few hours later and, you know, get yourself up to date again. I personally do this a little bit differently, which I would also advise if you can do it. I usually am always one day ahead. So when I make every days, I don't make the render from that day for that day. So, for example, the render that I make today is actually the render for tomorrow. And that's just for emergencies. You know, whenever I have like a medical emergency or anything else like that, there could be a time where I am not able to make it every day, but I still have one to put on Instagram. And use those kind of days to, you know, level out the burnouts. And it works very, very well. And the number one thing that I learned, be consistent. And this is not necessarily something that has to do with quality consistency, but it has to do with, you know, doing it consistently. Do not stop no matter what. And I personally found a routine in the days where I can do this, which is right before lunch, which is essentially between 11:30 a.m. to like 13:30, something like that. And the great thing about that is that at that time, I can't do really anything else, you know, like I'm working in the morning, I can't do anything with friends at that time. It's pretty much all just sitting at home and doing nothing. So I told myself I use exactly those 2 hours to make my everyday. And there's literally no excuses for this. When a friend asks me, let's hang out for lunch, I either make sure that I make my everyday before that, or I tell him I'll come half an hour later. Because if I ever stop this discipline that I have here, this whole project could be at jeopardy, and I don't want to do that. And one thing that you also should keep in mind, once you get to a certain level, let's say your first month, your first year, your first 2 years, 3 years, you look back at it like a visual diary, and you look back at like, holy shit, look at what I accomplished. I did this for X amount of time without leaving a day. And after a while, your brain will tell you, you can't just leave out a day now. Like, you actually want to keep doing it. Even if you don't have time, you squeeze it in somewhere and you'll still do it. Just because you look back and like, okay, I haven't missed a day in 8 years. I can't just miss a day now. Like it's like not acceptable. I can't do that. Not because other people think it's not acceptable, but you, for yourself, you will start to find it unacceptable. And that is where you'll just keep going and keep going, keep progressing. And it's just an endless journey. Like, my current goal is 10 years. But, you know, I know exactly for a fact I will not stop after the 10 years. But that's the first goal. That is the thing. And the only question that you have to ask yourself in order to do this project is, are you willing to commit? Because that is the thing. Are you willing to commit? It doesn't have to be 10 years, it doesn't have to be 5 years. Do it for a week, do it for 2, do it for a month, do it for a year. And the funny thing is, every day is also not for everybody. It's not that every day is the way to go. You know, I have friends who told me I can't do it every day, but they do weeklies. They do one render every single week. They put like all their soul into it, do it once a week. That is also fine. Just be consistent and commit to it. That's the big click in the brain that has to happen. This was a very long video actually. Thanks for everybody who ended up watching the whole thing. I hope you enjoyed it. It was more a video to celebrate, you know, the 8 years that I pushed through. I will definitely do another one of these at 10 years. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any more questions about this, feel free to leave a comment or a question down below in the comment section. Also, maybe, you know, share your experiences with everydays with renders that you did. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe and follow my journey for a little more. Yeah, peace out guys. Love you all.